My hands were still numb from the 3-mile walk to Grandmother Ruth's house when I finally knocked on her front door that Thanksgiving afternoon. I had been sleeping in my beat-up Honda Civic for the past 2 months, and this was my only clean shirt. As I sat down at the dining room table trying to act normal, while my stomach growled desperately, Grandmother Ruth suddenly slammed her hand down and stood up. Her face turned bright red as she pointed directly at me and shouted across the table filled with turkey and stuffing, "Collins, I want answers right now. Why is an elderly couple living in that $1 million vacation home I bought for you in Colorado?" I froze completely, my fork halfway to my mouth, genuinely confused and stammering, "What are you talking about? I'm homeless right now." At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. The entire family stared at me in stunned silence as my grandmother's words echoed through the dining room. My Uncle Robert stopped carving the turkey, my cousin Emma put down her wine glass, and my sister Sarah suddenly looked like she had seen a ghost. The color drained completely from her face as she gripped the edge of the tablecloth. "Homeless!" Grandmother Ruth repeated, her voice cracking with disbelief. "Collins, what do you mean homeless? I gave you over $1 million 18 months ago, specifically to buy yourself a beautiful home." My mind reeled as I tried to process what she was saying. $1 million. I had been working double shifts at a local warehouse for minimum wage, sleeping in parking lots, and showering at truck stops. I owned exactly $237 in cash, and whatever clothes fit in my backpack. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. "That must be Marcus," Grandmother Ruth said, still glaring at me. "I called my lawyer because I drove by your property in Aspen last week, and complete strangers answered the door. They told me they bought the house 6 months ago." My sister Sarah suddenly excused herself to the kitchen, claiming she needed to check on the dessert. But I noticed her hands were shaking as she hurried away from the table. Uncle Robert went to answer the door, and moments later, a tall man in an expensive gray suit walked into the dining room carrying a leather briefcase. He looked around at all of us sitting there with our Thanksgiving dinner growing cold and untouched. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marcus Thompson, Mrs. Ruth's attorney. I apologize for interrupting your family meal, but we have a very serious legal matter to discuss." Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. He spread them across the table next to the mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce. "Collins," he said, looking directly at me, "I've been trying to reach you for the past 4 months regarding several urgent matters concerning property taxes and financial irregularities on your Colorado residence." "I don't have a Colorado residence," I said quietly. "I don't have any residence at all." Marcus frowned and pulled out a legal document. "According to these records, you purchased a $1.2 million vacation home in Aspen, Colorado, on March 15th of last year, using funds from a trust account established by your grandmother." Grandmother Ruth nodded emphatically. "I set up that trust specifically for Collins after his grandfather passed away. I wanted to make sure he had a secure future and could afford a proper home. The money came from the sale of my late husband's business." My head was spinning. I looked around the table at my family members, all of whom were staring at me with expressions ranging from confusion to suspicion. My cousin Emma leaned forward. "Collins, are you seriously telling us you don't know anything about this house? Grandmother Ruth showed us pictures of it last Christmas. It's gorgeous with mountain views and a hot tub." "I've never seen any pictures," I stammered. "I've never been to Colorado. I don't understand what's happening here." Marcus pulled out another document. "Here's a copy of the purchase agreement with your signature, Collins. And here's the deed to the property, also signed by you." He slid the papers across the table toward me. I picked up the documents and stared at them in shock. There was indeed a signature that looked exactly like mine, but I had absolutely no memory of signing anything. The address was for a property in Aspen that I had never heard of, and the purchase price was more money than I had ever imagined owning. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "Someone forged my signature. I never signed these papers." Grandmother Ruth's expression shifted from anger to deep concern. "Collins, are you telling me someone stole the money I gave you? Someone took advantage of my gift." "What gift?" I asked desperately. "Grandmother, I never received any money from you. I've been homeless for months. I've been eating at soup kitchens and sleeping in my car." The room fell completely silent, except for the sound of the kitchen faucet running where Sarah was supposedly washing dishes. Uncle Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Ruth, are you absolutely certain you transferred the money to Collins? Maybe there was some kind of banking error." Marcus shook his head. "The transfer was completed successfully. $1.2 million moved from Mrs. Ruth's account into a trust account established for Collins Miller on February 20th of last year. Then, 3 weeks later, the entire amount was withdrawn and used for the Colorado property purchase." I felt sick to my stomach. "Can you show me the bank records?" Marcus pulled out several sheets of bank statements. "Here's the initial transfer from your grandmother's account, and here's the withdrawal record showing the funds being moved to complete the real estate purchase." I studied the paperwork carefully. Everything appeared legitimate from the account numbers to the official banking letterheads. But I had never opened any trust account, and I had definitely never authorized any property purchase. "Marcus, who else would have access to this trust account?" Grandmother Ruth asked. According to the banking records, only Collins himself would have access. The account required his Social Security number, driver's license information, and personal identification to establish. That's when something clicked in my mind. 3 months ago, I had noticed that several pieces of my mail had gone missing, including a new credit card I had applied for and some official documents from the Department of Motor Vehicles. At the time, I had assumed they were lost in the mail system. "Someone stole my identity," I said slowly. "Someone has been using my personal information to open accounts and make purchases." From the kitchen, I heard the sound of a plate breaking, followed by my sister Sarah's voice saying, "Sorry," a little too loudly. Grandmother Ruth looked devastated. "Collins, I can't believe someone would do such a terrible thing. That money was supposed to give you security and independence. I've been so proud thinking you were living comfortably in your own beautiful home." Marcus gathered up the documents. "This is definitely a case for law enforcement. Identity theft and financial fraud of this magnitude is a federal crime. We need to contact the FBI immediately." "But what about the elderly couple living in the house now?" I asked. "Are they part of this scheme?" "I spoke with them briefly," Grandmother Ruth said. "They seem like lovely people named Tom and Patricia. They told me they purchased the house legitimately through a real estate agent. They had no idea anything was wrong." Marcus nodded. "They're likely innocent victims as well. Someone sold them stolen property, which means they could lose their home and their money." I felt a crushing weight of guilt and anger. Not only had someone destroyed my life and stolen from my grandmother, but they had also hurt innocent people who thought they were buying their dream retirement home. "We need to figure out who did this," I said firmly. "And we need to make sure everyone gets justice." From the kitchen, Sarah called out in a strained voice, "Does anyone want coffee with dessert?" "What tea?" But something about her tone made me suspicious. She had been acting strange ever since Grandmother Ruth started talking about the house, and now she was hiding in the kitchen instead of participating in this crucial family discussion. Marcus closed his briefcase. "Collins, I'll need you to come to my office tomorrow morning so we can begin the legal process of reporting this fraud and working with authorities to investigate. Bring any identification documents you have, and we'll start building a case." "Marcus," Grandmother Ruth said quietly, "is there any chance Collins will get the money back? Is there any way to fix this?" "It depends on several factors," Marcus replied. "If we can identify the perpetrator and recover the stolen funds, there's hope. But these cases can take years to resolve, and sometimes the money is never recovered." I looked around the table at my family, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had happened. Someone had stolen my entire future, betrayed my grandmother's generous gift, and hurt innocent people in the process. but I was determined to find out who was responsible and make them pay for what they had done. The Thanksgiving dinner that was supposed to bring our family together had instead revealed a devastating crime that would change all of our lives forever. After Marcus left, and the rest of the family awkwardly finished dinner, I found Sarah alone in the kitchen, scrubbing the same plate over and over again. Her hands were visibly trembling, and she kept glancing toward the dining room where everyone else was talking in hushed tones about the shocking revelations. "Sarah," I said quietly, closing the kitchen door behind me. "We need to talk." She immediately dropped the plate into the sink with a loud clatter. Talk about what this is just as much of a surprise to me as everyone else. But her voice sounded forced and artificial, nothing like her usual confident tone. I had known my sister for 28 years, and I could tell when she was lying. "You've been acting weird ever since Grandmother Ruth mentioned the house," I said, stepping closer. "And you turned pale the moment she started talking about the money. What do you know about this?" Sarah tried to walk past me toward the door, but I gently blocked her path. "Collins, I don't know anything. Now please move so I can go back to the family." "Sarah, look me in the eyes and tell me you have nothing to do with this." She finally looked directly at me, and that's when I saw the guilt written all over her face. Her eyes filled with tears, and her lower lip started quivering. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, sinking down into one of the kitchen chairs. "Jake said it would be simple. He promised me no one would get hurt." My blood ran cold. "Jake, your boyfriend. Jake, what does he have to do with this?" Sarah buried her face in her hands and started crying. "He works at Premier Real Estate downtown. He said he could help you get established with credit and property ownership since you were struggling financially. He convinced me it would actually help you in the long run." "Sarah, what exactly did you do?" She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "Jake said he needed some of your personal information to set up pre-approved loans and financial accounts for when you were ready to buy a house. He made it sound like he was doing you a favor. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. You gave him my personal information. Just your social security number and birth certificate information," she said defensively. "He said real estate professionals do this all the time to help people with poor credit get prepared for homeownership." "Sarah, do you realize what you've done? Someone used that information to steal over $1 million from Grandmother Ruth." "That's not possible," she said, shaking her head frantically. "Jake would never steal money. He's been helping me pay for my apartment and my car payments. He even bought me this jewelry." She gestured to an expensive-looking diamond necklace I hadn't noticed before. "How long has Jake been paying for your expenses?" I asked suspiciously. "About 18 months, she said quietly. The timeline hit me like a freight train. 18 months ago was exactly when Grandmother Ruth had established the trust fund. Jake had been using stolen money to finance Sarah's lifestyle, and she had been unknowingly benefiting from the crime against our own family. "Sarah, where did you think Jake was getting the money to pay for your apartment? He's a real estate agent, not a millionaire?" Her face went white as the realization dawned on her. "He told me he was getting big commissions from luxury property sales. He said business was really good." "Show me your apartment lease," I said firmly. Why?" "Because I want to see who's actually paying for it." Sarah reluctantly pulled out her phone and showed me her rental agreement. The monthly payment was being made by someone named Collins Miller to a luxury apartment complex I could never afford. "Sarah, this lease shows that I'm the one paying your rent. According to this document, I've been paying $3,000 a month for your apartment." She stared at the phone screen in horror. "That's impossible. Jake handles all the payments. He said his company had a corporate housing program." I was starting to understand the scope of Jake's deception. He hadn't just stolen Grandmother Ruth's money for the house purchase. He had been using my stolen identity to pay for Sarah's living expenses, probably building up a false financial history that made the large property purchase seem legitimate. "Sarah, I need you to tell me everything Jake asked you to do. Every piece of information you gave him, every document you showed him, everything." She took a shaky breath. Last year at Christmas, when you came to Grandmother Ruth's house, Jake was with me. He said he wanted to meet the family. While we were all looking at old photo albums, he asked to see your driver's license because he wanted to know your middle name for some reason. Did you show it to him? I took a picture of it with my phone. He said he was just curious about family names. She paused. And when you left your wallet on the coffee table to help Uncle Robert with something in the garage, Jake asked me to take pictures of your credit cards and insurance cards. He said he was studying different card designs for a marketing project at work. I felt sick. What else? He asked me to get copies of your birth certificate and social security card. He said he was helping you apply for pre-approved credit accounts that would be ready when you got back on your feet financially. I thought he was being kind and supportive. Where did you get copies of those documents? From Grandmother Ruth's safe, Sarah admitted quietly. She keeps copies of important documents for all the family members. I told her I needed them to help you with a job application. I realized that Jake had been manipulating Sarah's emotions and her desire to help me in order to gain access to everything he needed for a complete identity theft. He had turned my sister into an unwitting accomplice in a crime against our own family. Sarah, did Jake ever ask you to sign anything or forge my signature? She nodded miserably. He brought me some banking forms and credit applications. He said they were pre-qualification paperwork that would help establish your financial profile. He showed me examples of your signature from the photos I had taken and asked me to practice writing it so the forms would look authentic. You forged my signature. I thought I was helping you qualify for legitimate financial services, she cried. Jake made it sound like this was normal procedure for people with credit problems. I was beginning to understand that Jake was far more sophisticated and manipulative than I had initially realized. He had carefully groomed Sarah over time, gradually asking for more and more compromising favors, while making her believe she was helping her struggling brother. Sarah, has Jake ever asked you to intercept my mail? She looked down at the floor. Sometimes when mail came for you at Grandmother Ruth's house, Jake said he could make sure it got to you faster, since he knew you were moving around a lot for work. He said the postal service was unreliable for people without permanent addresses. That explained how Jake had been able to intercept financial documents and official correspondence that would have alerted me to the fraudulent accounts being opened in my name. Sarah, I need to know everything about Jake. His full name, where he really works, where he lives, everything. His name is Jake Morrison, and he works at Premier Real Estate on 5th Street downtown. He lives in a condo in the Marina District, but I've never actually been inside. He always comes to my apartment instead. I pulled out my phone and searched for Premier Real Estate. Their website showed staff photos and biographies, but there was no Jake Morrison listed among their agents. Sarah, look at this, I said, showing her the website. There's no Jake Morrison working at this company. She stared at the screen in confusion. But he has business cards and everything. He talks about his clients and property sales all the time. Do you have one of his business cards? She fumbled through her purse and pulled out a professional-looking card with Jake's name and the Premier Real Estate logo. But when I compared it to the official website, I noticed subtle differences in the font and layout. Sarah, this is a fake business card. Jake doesn't work for this company. The full reality of the situation was starting to hit her. Collins, are you saying Jake has been lying about everything? About his job, about helping you, about the money? I'm saying Jake has been running a sophisticated identity theft operation, and he used your feelings for him to manipulate you into helping him steal from our family. Sarah started crying harder. I can't believe I was so stupid. I thought he loved me. I thought he was successful and caring. Sarah, we need to contact the police immediately, and you need to tell me if Jake has asked you to do anything else recently. She wiped her eyes and thought for a moment. Last week, he asked me to take pictures of some financial documents in Grandmother Ruth's house. He said he was working on a real estate investment opportunity that might benefit the whole family. What kind of documents? Bank statements, insurance policies, investment account information. He said he wanted to research retirement communities that might be good options for Grandmother Ruth in the future. I realized that Jake's criminal activities were far from over. He was apparently planning to target other members of our family, possibly attempting to steal from Grandmother Ruth's remaining savings and assets. Sarah, we have to stop him before he hurts anyone else, and we have to find a way to get justice for what he's already done. She nodded through her tears. Collins, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was helping you, and instead, I helped someone destroy your life. Sarah, Jake is a professional criminal who manipulated your emotions to commit these crimes. You're a victim too, but now you have a chance to make things right by helping me stop him. As we stood in that kitchen surrounded by the remnants of our ruined Thanksgiving dinner, I realized that my sister's betrayal had been born out of love and naivety, rather than malice. But Jake Morrison, whoever he really was, had deliberately and systematically destroyed multiple lives for his own financial gain. It was time to fight back. The next morning, I met Marcus at his law office downtown, bringing Sarah with me so she could provide a full statement about Jake's manipulation and fraud. Marcus had already contacted Detective Williams from the Financial Crimes Unit, who arrived shortly after we did. Detective Williams was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She spread out a collection of documents on Marcus's conference table and looked directly at me. Collins, we've discovered some additional information about your case that I need to discuss with you immediately. She pulled out an official-looking certificate and placed it in front of me. According to public records, you were married on January 15th of last year to a woman named Elena Martinez. I stared at the marriage certificate in complete shock. That's impossible. I've never been married to anyone, and I've never met anyone named Elena Martinez. Detective Williams nodded. We figured as much. We've been investigating Elena Martinez, and she doesn't appear to exist. No social security number, no birth certificate, no employment history, nothing. She's a completely fabricated identity. Marcus leaned forward. Why would someone create a fake marriage? Joint property ownership, Detective Williams explained. In many states, married couples can purchase real estate together without both parties being present for the closing. The fake marriage gave Jake Morrison legal authority to act on Collins's behalf during the property purchase. Sarah spoke up from her chair in the corner. Jake asked me about Collins's dating history last year. He wanted to know if Collins had any serious girlfriends or romantic relationships. I told him Collins had been single for a while. Detective Williams made notes in her file. Jake was probably making sure there wouldn't be a real girlfriend who might question a surprise marriage. She pulled out another set of documents. Collins, we've also discovered that someone has been using your identity to open multiple credit cards and bank accounts over the past 18 months. The total fraudulent debt in your name is currently over $400,000. I felt like the room was spinning. $400,000. Credit cards, personal loans, car loans, even a boat loan. Detective Williams continued. Someone has been living an extremely expensive lifestyle using your identity. Marcus reviewed the paperwork. This explains how Jake was able to afford Sarah's apartment and expenses. He was essentially running a sophisticated credit fraud operation alongside the property theft. Detective Williams turned to Sarah. Sarah, I need you to think carefully. Did Jake ever mention other girlfriends or women he was dating? Sarah looked uncomfortable. He said he had an ex-girlfriend named Victoria who lived in Phoenix. He claimed she was jealous and sometimes caused problems for him. Did he ever show you photos of this Victoria or introduce you to her? No, but he got phone calls from her sometimes. He would always take them in another room and seemed stressed afterward. Detective Williams and Marcus exchanged meaningful looks. Collins, Detective Williams said, we have reason to believe Jake Morrison is not his real name, and that he's been running similar identity theft schemes in other states. We're coordinating with federal authorities because this appears to be part of a much larger criminal operation. She pulled out a folder containing photographs. We'd like you and Sarah to look at these photos and tell us if you recognize anyone. The folder contains surveillance photos from various locations, showing Jake with different women in different cities. In some photos, he appeared to be posing as a successful businessman. In others, he was dressed casually and looked much younger. "That's definitely Jake," Sarah said, pointing to several of the images. "But he looks different in some of these photos." Detective Williams nodded. "We believe Jake uses different identities and personas depending on the type of fraud he's committing. In Phoenix, he was known as Jason Miller. In Denver, he went by Jacob Marcus. He targets women who have access to family financial information or elderly relatives with significant assets." The realization hit me like a truck. He specifically chose Sarah because she had access to our grandmother and our family's financial information. "Exactly," Detective Williams confirmed. "Jake is what we call a confidence man, or con artist. He builds romantic relationships with women who can provide him access to valuable personal and financial information." Sarah started crying again. "So, he never actually cared about me at all. Our entire relationship was just part of his criminal plan." "I'm sorry, Sarah, but that appears to be the case. These types of criminals are skilled at manipulating emotions to achieve their goals." Marcus pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. "Detective Williams, what's our next step in terms of recovering the stolen property and clearing Collins's name?" "We're going to execute a search warrant on Jake's residence and workplace tomorrow morning. In the meantime, we need Collins to work with us to set up a controlled meeting with Jake." "A controlled meeting?" I asked. "We want Sarah to contact Jake and arrange to meet him, claiming she has information about additional family financial assets he might be interested in. We'll have surveillance teams in place to monitor the conversation and gather evidence." Sarah looked terrified. "What if he realizes I'm working with police? What if he becomes violent?" Detective Williams reassured her. "We'll have plainclothes officers positioned nearby, and you'll be wearing a recording device. We'll abort the operation if there's any sign of danger." She pulled out another document. "Collins, there's something else you need to know. We've identified at least 12 other victims of Jake's identity theft operation across 5 different states. The total amount of money stolen is over $8 million. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. $8 million. Jake has been running this operation for at least 3 years. He targets families with elderly members who have significant savings or assets. He uses romantic relationships to gain access to personal information, then systematically drains bank accounts and opens fraudulent credit lines." Marcus shook his head. "How has he managed to avoid detection for so long?" "He's very sophisticated," Detective Williams explained. "He moves frequently, uses multiple identities, and carefully spaces out his crimes to avoid creating obvious patterns. He also targets victims who are unlikely to immediately notice missing money or fraudulent accounts." Sarah spoke up quietly. "Jake told me he travels a lot for work. He said he had clients in different states and sometimes had to be away for weeks at a time. He was probably traveling to commit crimes in other locations," Detective Williams said. "This is a full-time criminal enterprise for him." I felt a surge of anger, thinking about all the other families Jake had destroyed. "Detective Williams, how can we make sure he faces consequences for all of his crimes, not just what he did to my family? That's why we need your cooperation with the sting operation. If we can gather enough evidence during the controlled meeting, we can build a federal case that addresses his crimes across multiple states." Marcus reviewed the timeline of events. "So Jake has been systematically destroying Collins's financial identity while using his romantic relationship with Sarah to maintain access to the family's information. And planning his next target," Detective Williams added. "Based on Sarah's statement about Jake asking for information about Grandmother Ruth's assets, we believe he was preparing to steal from her directly." Sarah gasped. "You mean he was going to steal from Grandmother Ruth too?" "Elderly financial abuse is one of his specialties," Detective Williams confirmed. He probably would have used fake medical bills or investment scams to drain her savings. I realized that stopping Jake wasn't just about getting justice for what he had already done. It was about preventing him from destroying more lives and protecting other innocent families from becoming his victims. Detective Williams, I'll do whatever it takes to help you catch him and make sure he can never hurt anyone else. She smiled for the first time since we had met. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear, Collins. Now let's talk about how we're going to take down this operation. As we began planning the sting operation that would hopefully bring Jake Morrison to justice, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was going to fight back against the person who had stolen my identity, betrayed my family, and hurt countless innocent people. 2 days after meeting with Detective Williams, I moved in temporarily with my friend Danny, who lived in a small apartment across town. Danny worked as a computer technician, and when I explained the situation, he immediately offered to help me research Jake Morrison and gather digital evidence. Collins' identity theft cases leave digital footprints everywhere, Danny explained as we sat in front of his multiple computer monitors. If Jake has been using your information to open accounts and make purchases, there's going to be a trail we can follow. Sarah had provided me with Jake's laptop password, which she had observed him entering during one of his visits to her apartment. She felt terrible about her role in the crimes and was desperate to make amends by helping us gather evidence. The password is VictoryLap 2019, Sarah told us. He always used that same password for everything. Danny accessed Jake's cloud storage account and discovered a treasure trove of incriminating information. Jake had been meticulously documenting his criminal activities, apparently keeping records for tax evasion purposes, or possibly as insurance against potential accomplices. Look at this, Danny said, pointing to a spreadsheet on the screen. He's got a detailed list of all his victims, including their personal information, the amounts of money stolen, and timeline of activities. I studied the spreadsheet in amazement. Jake had stolen from 12 different people across 5 states, with total damages exceeding $8 million, just as Detective Williams had estimated. Each victim entry included photographs, family background information, and detailed notes about their financial assets. Danny, look at this entry for my family, I said, feeling sick to my stomach. The spreadsheet showed that Jake had been planning to target our family for over 2 years. He had detailed information about Grandmother Ruth's net worth, Uncle Robert's business assets, and even my cousin Emma's college fund. The entry noted that Sarah was the access point and included a psychological profile describing her as trusting, family-oriented, easily manipulated through romantic attention. This guy is a complete sociopath, Danny said. He's been treating your family like a business opportunity. We discovered that Jake had detailed plans for stealing additional money from Grandmother Ruth through fake investment opportunities and medical billing scams. He had created false documents for a retirement community called Sunset Manor and was planning to convince Grandmother Ruth to invest her life savings in purchasing a residence there. Danny, we need to make copies of all this evidence and get it to Detective Williams immediately. Already on it, Danny replied, transferring files to a secure drive. But Collins, there's something else you need to see. He opened another folder labeled Future Targets and showed me photographs and information about dozens of other potential victims. Jake had been researching wealthy elderly people and their families across the country, preparing to expand his criminal operation. He's not just stealing from people, I realized. He's systematically destroying entire families. Sarah arrived at Danny's apartment later that evening with more disturbing news. Collins, I went back to my apartment and found some things Jake left behind that I think you should see. She pulled out a box containing fake identification documents with Jake's photo, but different names. There were driver's licenses for Jason Miller, Jacob Marcus, and James Mitchell, along with corresponding credit cards and social security cards. Sarah, how many different identities does this guy have? I found 7 different sets of identification documents, she replied. And Collins, there's something else. I found letters addressed to different women in other cities. Jake has been maintaining romantic relationships with multiple people simultaneously. Danny examined the identification documents. These are professionally made. Jake must be working with a larger criminal organization that specializes in identity fraud. I realized we were dealing with something much bigger than a single con artist. Jake was part of a sophisticated criminal network with the resources to create multiple false identities and coordinate crimes across state lines. Collins, Sarah said quietly, I also found this. She handed me a letter that made my blood run cold. The letter was addressed to someone named Martin Chen in San Francisco and contained detailed information about our family, including grandmother Ruth's banking information and medical records. Jake was apparently selling our personal information to other criminals. Sarah, when did Jake write this letter? The date stamp shows it was written 2 weeks ago. Collins, I think Jake was planning to disappear soon and wanted to sell our family's information before he left town. Danny looked up from his computer. Collins, I just found Jake's travel records. He's got plane tickets to Mexico for next Tuesday. I felt a surge of panic. That's only 4 days away. If Jake leaves the country, we'll never be able to recover the stolen money or get justice for his victims. We need to contact Detective Williams right now, Sarah said. I called Detective Williams on her emergency number and explained what we had discovered. She was shocked by the scope of the evidence we had gathered. Collins, this is incredible work. You've uncovered more evidence in 2 days than we usually gather in months of investigation. Can you bring everything to my office, first thing tomorrow morning? Detective Williams Jake has plane tickets to Mexico for next Tuesday. We're running out of time. Don't worry, she replied. We're going to execute the sting operation tomorrow afternoon. Jake's not going anywhere. That night, I couldn't sleep, as I thought about all the lives Jake had destroyed and all the families he had betrayed. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was finally taking control of the situation. Sarah had agreed to wear a recording device and meet with Jake to discuss new opportunities involving our family's assets. Detective Williams would have surveillance teams positioned around the meeting location, and they would arrest Jake as soon as they had enough recorded evidence of his criminal activities. Collins, Danny said as we reviewed the digital evidence one more time. You should be proud of what you're doing. Most identity theft victims never get the chance to fight back like this. I'm not just fighting for myself, I replied. I'm fighting for my grandmother, for Sarah, for Tom and Patricia, who lost their home, and for all the other victims who deserve justice. The next morning, Marcus called with additional good news. Collins, I've been working with federal prosecutors, and they're very interested in Jake's case. If tomorrow's sting operation is successful, Jake could face decades in federal prison. What about recovering the stolen money? That's more complicated, but we've identified several of Jake's bank accounts and assets that can be seized to provide restitution for victims. As I prepared for the most important day in this fight for justice, I realized that Jake Morrison had made a crucial mistake when he decided to target my family. He had underestimated my determination to protect the people I loved and to make sure no other innocent families would suffer the way we had. Tomorrow, we were going to take down one of the most sophisticated criminals I had ever encountered, and I was going to make sure he paid for every life he had destroyed. The next afternoon, Sarah sat across from Jake Morrison at a coffee shop downtown, wearing a wire and trying to control her nerves. I was positioned at a surveillance van 2 blocks away, with Detective Williams and her team listening to every word through high-quality recording equipment. Sarah had texted Jake that morning, claiming she had discovered additional information about our family's financial assets that might interest him. Jake had immediately agreed to meet, apparently excited about the prospect of stealing even more money before his planned departure to Mexico. Sarah, you look beautiful as always, Jake said as he sat down at their table. Through the wire, I could hear the fake charm in his voice that had convinced my sister he cared about her. Thank you, Jake. I missed you while you were away on business, Sarah replied, following the script we had rehearsed with Detective Williams. Business has been very good lately, Jake said. In fact, I'll be taking an extended vacation soon to celebrate some recent successes. Sarah took a deep breath. Jake, I need to talk to you about something important. I found some financial documents at my grandmother's house that I think you should see. What kind of documents? Investment accounts and insurance policies I didn't know she had. Jake, she has almost $3 million in assets I never knew about. I could hear the excitement in Jake's voice as he responded. Sarah, that's incredible. Your grandmother is even wealthier than I realized. Jake, I want to help you access those accounts like we discussed before, but I need to understand exactly what we're doing. There was a pause before Jake answered. Sarah, remember when I helped your brother Collins get established with that property in Colorado? We can do something similar for your grandmother. I can set up investment opportunities that will benefit the whole family. Sarah pressed further, as Detective Williams had instructed. Jake Collins told me he never received any property. He says someone stole money from our family. What really happened with that Colorado house? Jake's tone immediately became defensive. Collins is confused, Sarah. He's been having some personal problems lately, and his memory isn't reliable. Trust me, everything I did was legitimate and beneficial for him. But Jake Collins showed me legal documents saying someone forged his signature and stole over $1 million. How is that possible if you were helping him? Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had completely changed from charming to cold and calculating. Sarah, I think Collins has been filling your head with paranoid nonsense. Your brother is jealous of our relationship and wants to cause problems between us. Jake, I just want to understand the truth. The truth is that Collins is a failure who can't appreciate the help people try to give him. But you're different, Sarah. You're smart and beautiful, and you understand that sometimes we have to take advantage of opportunities. Sarah continued following our script. What kind of opportunities are you talking about, Jake? I'm talking about your grandmother's money, Sarah. She's an elderly woman who doesn't need $3 million sitting in bank accounts, earning minimal interest. We could invest that money in profitable ventures and make much more for everyone involved. Detective Williams gave me a thumbs up from across the van. Jake was confessing to his criminal intentions on tape. How would we access my grandmother's money? Sarah asked. The same way we accessed Collins's trust fund, Jake replied. We used the right paperwork and the right signatures to move money into more profitable investments. Jake, are you saying you forged Collins's signature? I'm saying I helped Collins access opportunities he was too scared to pursue on his own. Sometimes, people need guidance to make the right financial decisions. Sarah took a deep breath and asked the question that would seal Jake's fate. Jake, have you done this with other families? Have you helped other people access their money? Jake laughed. Sarah, I've helped dozens of families optimize their financial situations. I have clients in Phoenix, Denver, Portland, and Miami who are all much wealthier because of my guidance. Detective Williams signaled to her team that they had enough evidence to make the arrest. But suddenly, Jake's tone changed again. Sarah, why are you asking so many questions about my business activities? This doesn't sound like a normal conversation between us. Through the wire, I could hear the suspicion growing in Jake's voice. I'm just trying to understand how we can help my grandmother, Sarah replied, but her voice was shaking with nervousness. Sarah, are you recording this conversation? There was a moment of terrified silence. Then Jake's voice became furious. You lying witch! You're working with the police, aren't you? Your pathetic brother convinced you to spy on me. I heard the sound of a chair being knocked over and Sarah crying out in fear. Detective Williams, we need to move now, I shouted. The surveillance team immediately began converging on the coffee shop from multiple directions. I ran from the van toward the building, desperate to make sure Sarah was safe. When I burst through the coffee shop door, I saw Jake gripping Sarah's wrist and pulling her toward a back exit. The other customers were staring in shock at the unfolding drama. Let go of my sister, I yelled across the room. Jake spun around and saw me approaching, his face contorted with rage as he released Sarah and pointed directly at me. You? You destroyed everything. I had the perfect plan, and you ruined it with your pathetic investigation. Jake, the only thing I destroyed was your criminal operation. I replied, trying to stay calm while Detective Williams and her team surrounded the building. Criminal operation? Jake laughed bitterly. I was providing financial services to people too stupid to manage their own money. Your grandmother gave you $1 million, and you were sleeping in your car like a homeless bum. Because you stole it, I shouted. You stole from my family and destroyed my life. Jake suddenly rushed toward me, apparently planning to fight his way out of the situation. But Detective Williams and 2 other officers entered the coffee shop at that moment and immediately tackled him to the ground. Jake Morrison, you're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and financial elder abuse, Detective Williams announced as she handcuffed him. As Jake was being arrested, he continued screaming accusations and threats. Collins was the mastermind. He planned everything and convinced Sarah to help him. I was just following his instructions. Jake, we have recordings of you confessing to multiple felonies, Detective Williams replied. You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it. As they led Jake away in handcuffs, he looked back at me with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've done, Collins. This is much bigger than just me. You've made enemies you can't even imagine. I helped Sarah to a chair as she cried with relief and residual fear. The confrontation was over, but I realized that Jake's final threat suggested there might be more danger ahead. Detective Williams approached us as the other officers secured the scene. Collins, Sarah, you both did an incredible job today. We have more than enough evidence to convict Jake Morrison on federal charges. What happens next? I asked. Jake will be held without bail while we continue investigating his criminal network. Based on the evidence you gathered, we expect to file charges in multiple states. As I looked around the coffee shop at the aftermath of the sting operation, I felt a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. We had successfully caught the man who had destroyed my life and hurt my family. But the fight for complete justice and recovery was far from over. Jake Morrison's criminal empire was beginning to crumble, and I was determined to make sure every victim received the justice they deserved. 3 weeks after Jake's arrest, I sat in Marcus's office as he reviewed the latest developments in the case. Federal prosecutors had filed charges against Jake Morrison in 5 states, and the FBI had discovered evidence linking him to a much larger identity theft network operating across the country. Collins, I have some significant news, Marcus said, sliding a document across his desk. The federal investigation has uncovered over $3 million in assets that Jake accumulated through his criminal activities. $3 million. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and luxury vehicles purchased with stolen money. The government is seizing all of it for victim restitution. Detective Williams had called earlier that morning with even better news. Jake's laptop contained detailed records of every crime he had committed, including the exact amount stolen from each victim. The evidence was so comprehensive that prosecutors expected Jake to plead guilty rather than risk a trial. Marcus, what about the house in Colorado? Can Tom and Patricia keep their home? That's complicated, Marcus replied. Legally, the house was purchased with stolen money, so the original sale was invalid. However, Tom and Patricia are innocent victims who will receive compensation from the restitution fund. How much compensation? Enough to purchase a comparable home in the area where they want to live. The federal government recognizes that they were defrauded just as much as your family was. Sarah walked into Marcus's office at that moment, carrying a folder of documents. She had been working closely with federal investigators to help identify other victims of Jake's crimes, and had become an advocate for identity theft prevention. Collins, I just came from the FBI office, she said. They've identified 43 additional victims of Jake's network. The total amount stolen is over $15 million. I was amazed by the scope of the criminal operation we had helped expose. 43 victims. Jake was working with criminals in 6 different states, Sarah explained. They specialized in targeting elderly people and their families, just like he did with us. Marcus reviewed Sarah's paperwork. Sarah, what's the status of the charges against you? The federal prosecutor has agreed to drop all charges in exchange for my continued cooperation with the investigation, she replied. I'll be completing 200 hours of community service, working with identity theft victim advocacy groups. I was relieved that Sarah wouldn't face prison time for her unwitting participation in Jake's crimes. She had been manipulated and deceived, and her cooperation had been essential to bringing down the entire criminal network. Marcus, I said, when will I get my identity cleared and my credit restored? The process has already begun, he replied. All the fraudulent accounts have been closed, and the credit reporting agencies are removing the negative entries from your record. Your credit score should be completely restored within 6 months. Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes. Collins, I know I can never fully make up for what I helped Jake do to you and Grandmother Ruth, but I want to spend the rest of my life helping other families avoid going through what we experienced. Sarah, you made a mistake, but you also helped bring a dangerous criminal to justice. That takes courage. Marcus pulled out another document. Collins, there's something else. Your grandmother wants to discuss re-establishing the trust fund that was stolen. She still wants to give me money after everything that happened. She wants to talk to you about it personally. She's been very impressed with how you handled this crisis and your determination to protect the family. That afternoon, I drove to Grandmother Ruth's house for the first time since the disastrous Thanksgiving dinner that had started this entire ordeal. She was waiting for me in her living room with a pot of tea and a serious expression. Collins, sit down. We need to have an honest conversation about what happened and what comes next. I sat in the same chair where I had learned about Jake's crimes just a few weeks earlier. Grandmother Ruth, I'm so sorry about how Jake took advantage of your generosity and hurt our family. Collins, you have nothing to apologize for, she replied firmly. You were the victim of a sophisticated criminal who manipulated people who loved you. But what matters now is how you responded when you discovered the truth. She pulled out a legal document and placed it on the coffee table between us. Collins, I had originally planned to leave you a significant inheritance when I pass away. Your grandfather and I always believed you had great potential, even when you were struggling to find your direction in life. Grandmother Ruth, you don't need to give me anything. Just having your support means everything to me. Collins, my original plan was to leave you my entire estate worth approximately $8 million. I stared at her in shock. $8 million. Your grandfather's business was more successful than most people realized, and we made some very good investments over the years. I always intended for you to inherit the majority of our wealth because I believed you would use it wisely and generously. She picked up the legal document. What Jake stole from you wasn't just money, Collins. He stole your future security and independence. He stole the opportunity I had planned to give you. Grandmother Ruth, I had no idea about any inheritance plans. I wanted it to be a surprise. But Jake's crimes have taught me that surprises can be dangerous when there's so much money involved. From now on, I want our family financial arrangements to be completely transparent and legally protected. She handed me the document. Collins, I'm establishing a new trust fund for you, but this time with multiple safeguards against fraud and theft. And I want you to be actively involved in managing the family's financial affairs. I read through the document and couldn't believe what I was seeing. Grandmother Ruth was creating a $1.5 million trust fund for my immediate use, along with legal guarantees for the remainder of her estate. Grandmother Ruth, this is incredibly generous, but I'm not sure I'm ready for this kind of responsibility. Collins, you've already proven you're ready. You fought back against a criminal who destroyed your life. You protected our family from further harm. You helped law enforcement catch a dangerous person who was hurting innocent people. You've shown character and courage that makes me very proud. I felt tears forming in my eyes as I realized how much my grandmother's faith in me meant. For months, I had felt like a failure who couldn't even provide for himself. But she saw strength and potential in me that I hadn't recognized in myself. Grandmother Ruth, I promise I'll use this opportunity to build a good life and help other people who are going through what our family experienced. That's exactly what I hoped you would say, she replied with a smile. Colin's difficult experiences can either destroy us or make us stronger. You've chosen to become stronger, and that's why I know you'll use this gift wisely. As I left my grandmother's house that afternoon with the trust fund documents in my hand, I realized that Jake Morrison's criminal betrayal had ultimately led to something positive. It had revealed my family's love and support, shown me my own strength and resilience, and given me a sense of purpose in helping other people who faced similar challenges. The legal battle was far from over, but I was no longer fighting just for myself. I was fighting for justice and healing for everyone who had been hurt by criminals who preyed on trust and love. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse as Judge Rebecca Hansen sentenced Jake Morrison to 12 years in federal prison. The courtroom was packed with victims and their families, including Tom and Patricia from Colorado, who had become close friends during the legal proceedings. Mr. Morrison, Judge Hansen said, looking directly at Jake as he stood in shackles, your crimes represent a particularly heinous form of betrayal. You systematically destroyed the financial security and emotional well-being of dozens of innocent families across multiple states. Jake showed no emotion as the judge continued. You manipulated intimate relationships to gain access to personal information, then used that information to steal millions of dollars from people who trusted you. Your actions caused immeasurable harm to victims who may never fully recover from the trauma you inflicted. I had submitted a victim impact statement that was read aloud during the sentencing hearing. In it, I described how Jake's crimes had left me homeless and destroyed my sense of security, but also how fighting back against his criminal operation had given me strength and purpose I never knew I possessed. Sarah also provided a statement describing how Jake had manipulated her emotions and turned her into an unwitting accomplice in crimes against her own family. She had completed her community service working with identity theft victim advocacy groups and had decided to change careers to work full-time in victim services. Mr. Morrison, Judge Hansen concluded, in addition to 12 years in federal prison, you are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims totaling $14.7 million. The court is also imposing a lifetime ban on your access to credit and banking services. As Jake was led away to begin his prison sentence, he looked back at the courtroom filled with people whose lives he had destroyed. For the first time since I had known him, he appeared to understand the magnitude of the harm he had caused. Detective Williams approached me after the sentencing. Collins, I want you to know that your investigation and cooperation led to the arrest of Jake's entire criminal network. We've convicted 12 other people who were part of this identity theft operation. What happened to the other victims? Because of the evidence you helped gather, we were able to recover assets and provide restitution to almost everyone who was harmed. Your courage in fighting back saved dozens of families from continued financial destruction. Tom and Patricia joined us outside the courthouse. They had become like adopted grandparents to me during the legal proceedings, and we had developed a close friendship based on our shared experience as Jake's victims. Collins. Tom said, Patricia and I want you to know how grateful we are for everything you did to get us justice. We used our restitution money to buy a beautiful home in Arizona, and we've never been happier. Patricia hugged me tightly. Collins, you turned the worst experience of our lives into something positive by refusing to give up. You're a true hero. 3 months after Jake's sentencing, I graduated from a cybersecurity certification program that I had enrolled in, using money from Grandmother Ruth's trust fund. I had discovered that my experience as an identity theft victim gave me unique insights into how these crimes are committed and how they can be prevented. I was hired by a nonprofit organization called Identity Protection Services, where I worked with other victims to help them recover from fraud and rebuild their lives. My first-hand experience with identity theft made me an effective advocate and counselor for people who were going through the same trauma I had experienced. Sarah had also transformed her life in response to our family's crisis. She left her teaching job to work for the Federal Trade Commission's Identity Theft Prevention Division, where she developed educational programs to help people protect themselves from fraud. "Collins," she said during one of our weekly dinners, "I know I can never completely make up for my role in what Jake did to our family. But I want to spend the rest of my life making sure other people don't go through what we experienced." "Sarah, you've already made up for it by helping catch Jake and prevent other crimes. What matters now is what we do going forward." Grandmother Ruth had also made changes in response to our experience. She established a foundation that provided financial assistance to identity theft victims who couldn't afford legal representation or credit restoration services. The foundation was funded by her estate planning and had already helped over 200 families recover from fraud. "Collins," she told me during one of our monthly dinners, "I'm so proud of how you've turned this terrible experience into something that helps other people. That's exactly the kind of person your grandfather and I always believed you could become." 1 year after Jake's arrest, I was invited to speak at a conference on identity theft prevention hosted by the FBI. In my presentation, I shared the story of how my sister's relationship with a con artist had led to the discovery of a nationwide criminal operation. Identity theft isn't just about stolen money. I told the audience of law enforcement officials and victim advocates. It's about the destruction of trust and security that affects every aspect of a victim's life. But it's also about the strength and resilience that people can discover when they're forced to fight for their lives and their families. After my presentation, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Miller, my grandfather was victimized by a similar scam last month. Hearing your story gives me hope that we can get justice and recover from this." I spent an hour talking with her about resources and strategies for fighting back against identity theft. As I shared what I had learned from my own experience, I realized that Jake Morrison's attempt to destroy my life had instead led me to my true calling as an advocate for other victims. Detective Williams attended the conference and congratulated me on my presentation. "Collins, you've become one of our most valuable resources in fighting identity theft. Criminals like Jake Morrison count on victims being too ashamed or overwhelmed to fight back. Your story shows people that they can take control and get justice." That evening, I called Grandmother Ruth to share news about the conference and my growing work with identity theft victims. "Collins," she said, "I want you to know that your grandfather would be incredibly proud of the man you've become. You've taken a terrible betrayal and turned it into a force for good in the world." Grandmother Ruth: "I learned something important from this whole experience. When someone tries to destroy your life, you have two choices. You can let them succeed, or you can fight back and become stronger than they ever imagined." "What's the most important lesson you learned, Collins?" I thought carefully about my answer. "I learned that betrayal can actually reveal the true strength of the people who love you. Jake Morrison thought he was isolating me by manipulating Sarah and stealing from our family. But instead, his crimes brought us closer together and showed me how much support I really had." "And what about forgiveness, Collins? How do you feel about Sarah's role in what happened?" "Sarah was a victim too, even though her victimization looked different from mine. Jake Morrison is a professional manipulator who turned her love for me into a weapon against our family. Forgiving her wasn't just the right thing to do. It was essential for both of us to heal and move forward." As I ended the call with Grandmother Ruth, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just 18 months. I had gone from being homeless and hopeless to becoming a homeowner with a meaningful career, helping other people recover from financial crime. But the most important change wasn't financial or professional. It was the realization that I was much stronger and more resilient than I had ever believed. Jake Morrison had tried to destroy me by stealing my identity and my future. Instead, his crimes had forced me to discover who I really was and what I was capable of achieving. The betrayal that was supposed to ruin my life had actually saved it by showing me my true purpose and surrounding me with people who believed in my potential. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you can become the foundation for the best thing you'll ever do. Now, when I meet with identity theft victims who feel hopeless and overwhelmed, I share my story not as someone who escaped tragedy, but as someone who transformed tragedy into triumph. I tell them that criminals count on victims feeling powerless, but that every person has the strength to fight back and reclaim their life. And I always end by asking them the same question. I want to ask you, when someone tries to destroy your life, will you let them succeed? Or will you fight back and become stronger than they ever imagined possible? Have you, or someone you know, ever experienced identity theft or financial fraud? What steps do you think are most important for protecting yourself and your family from these types of crimes? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, or might help someone you know who's dealing with financial fraud, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of resilience and justice, and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about the power of fighting back against betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that no matter how dark things might seem, you always have the strength to reclaim your life and turn your pain into purpose.